Madam Vice President, I promise not to do the dance whilst I'm here as well. Firstly, can I take this opportunity to thank the Congress for giving me the opportunity to speak to this report. The Advisory Council was part of the original document in 2012, and it's positive to see us discussing the topic again today. The Advisory Council on Youth welcomes the report and the challenging questions it proposes to local and regional members. It's not often that policy documents are as engaging as this one, but we truly believe it looks to tackle the issue of how best to bridge that divide between young people and democratic life. I think the previous report, Youth Democracy, the changing face of youth political engagement, makes the point in great detail that young people do care about politics and about political ideas and the causes that are relevant to them, but they do not engage in traditional democratic structures. Across European institutions, we talk a lot about conflict resolution within and between states. And I believe that when it comes to youth participation, we face a similar situation. We have two parties, young people and politicians, who both want the same outcome, but believe neither party wants to come to the table to discuss it. Now, I believe the only way that we can resolve this issue is if we bring the parties closer together to talk about those differences that they have. On the one hand, we have politicians who lament young people for not engaging in political democracy, and we have young people who refuse to engage in political democracy because they do not think politicians want to speak to them. We have a classic example here of the chicken and the egg scenario. Young people don't engage in politics because politicians do not speak with them or engage them in decision making, and we have politicians who do not focus issues around young people or engage with them because they choose not to vote. So with any conflict, again, we have to sit both parties down at the table and talk about the differences that we have and how we can make solutions together. But I say again, the differences between politicians and young people when it comes to democratic life are not as far apart as one would think. I'd ask you to think back to when you first became engaged in politics. What was it that got you involved? Was it a thirst for power? For some in the room, maybe. But I would bet that the reason you became involved in politics and became engaged was because of a particular issue that you were passionate about. A cause that you wanted to stand for and an injustice that you wanted to overturn. And all of these things are what young people are doing now. They're fighting causes that are in front of them in their communities, and they're overturning injustices right at home. And you have a captive audience that wants to do good in the world, and if channeled correctly will do so, just like you did when you first engaged. Now, the report asks why are young people not seizing the opportunities proposed by political institutions, including local and regional authorities, to have their voices heard. But I would ask what opportunities have actually been given to young people. Now, as the economic crisis unfolded and austerity measures were implemented, budgets for young people and youth services across Europe were decimated. Regional and local elected representatives have been placed under enormous pressures to respond to national governments reducing their funding, with often the first place to find those savings in youth budgets and in democratic services for young people. But rather than reducing the funding for these services, they should actually be prioritised. If you want young people to engage, it has to be meaningful, and one of the best ways to do this is to give them autonomy over their own decisions, to give them budgets to decide what they want to do. Now, I was here 1 year ago and I spoke of the need to implement the co-management system in regional and local democratic structures. I implored members to be bold with what they wanted to achieve, as after all, it will not happen without your will. And I would ask those that are here today, that were also with me 1 year ago, what have you done in the past year to engage young people in meaningful representation? Did you leave, as I asked, and looked into the democratic institutions and democratic structures of your own youth services? And can you honestly say that you've done everything you could to empower more young people? But we also have to admit something about ourselves. And politicians, when it comes to youth participation, talk a good game, but do not implement what is being asked. And we have been adopting resolutions since 1992 in this very House on youth participation, and yet we have only made small steps in resolving the same issues back home. And one example quite clearly would be Congress's invitation for young people to be included as delegates or substitutes within the national delegations. And when I look around, there are not many faces other than those to my left that are under 30. So it is easy to talk at a top level of the need to include young people in democratic life, but this has to be implemented by you. Local and regional politics is the ground upon which this engagement can foster, but it must be where it begins. The power really is in your hands, those today, to make this happen. Influencing the agenda of the school curriculum is one example of how local and regional authorities could boost political and democratic engagement amongst young people. It is a recommendation in the report and one which the Advisory Council would